The federal government says Canada is suffering from a skills shortage, and to fill the gap, it plans to ramp up the number of immigrants it brings into this country. The Liberals say Canada will aim to take in 40,000 more immigrants by 2021. That means the total number of new arrivals would rise from 310,000 to 350,000. How ambitious is this target, and how does the government plan to meet it? Joining me now from Toronto is Immigration Minister Ahmed Hussen. Hi, Minister Hussen. Nice to see you again.
Thank you.
Minister, what happens? I know you've set these new immigration targets. What happens if you don't hit the targets?
Well, the targets are, we usually land in the target area every year, and because we arrive at these numbers after extensive consultations with Canadians, employers, municipal governments, provincial governments, and settlement organizations and local immigration partnerships, we tend to arrive usually very close to the target numbers. So I'm not too worried about that issue.
That's not always the case. In 2017, for example, Canada admitted about 159,000 permanent residents in economic class programs, representing about 55% of all 2017 admissions. And that was below the planned admissions range of 164,000 to 183,000, primarily due to longer than expected landing times.
Yes, what happens sometimes is when we select permanent residents to come to Canada through the economic stream, mainly in the express entry system, they have some time to land. So they may, we project them to land in 2017, we projected them to land in 2017, but a few of them actually landed in 2018.
Well, thousands less than you anticipated.
Yes, but it was still within the range of the target that we had.
Will your government increase funding for integration programs like language and job training to go along with these increased targets?
Absolutely. Every time that we've increased immigration levels, we have had a corresponding increase in settlement and integration funding. As a government, we've actually increased settlement and integration funding by 30% since we got into office. So any increases that you see as part of the plans that we've been announcing last year, but also this year, will have a corresponding increase in the settlement and integration of newcomers, because that's part of the commitment that we made to Canadians.
So if you're increasing between now and 2021 the number of immigrants coming in by 40,000, what is the corresponding increase in that funding exactly? What's the number?
Well, right now the expected landings this year are 310,000. The spending that we will spend on settlement and integration outside of Quebec is just shy of $1 billion. So because the increase will be 40,000 landings more than this year, there'll be a corresponding increase in that. It's hard to compute to you exactly the right dollar amount because, as you know, different newcomers use settlement services differently. So, for example, a very highly skilled federal skilled worker applicant will use may or may not use settlement services as much as a resettled refugee or a family member who's being reunited with their family. So there's always adjustments that need to be made, but the figure right now will be north of $1 billion, just a little bit more than $1 billion.
And Minister, you're also increasing refugee numbers from 43,000 to reach about 51,700 by 2021. Is that responsible given the continuing influx of claimants that are still being processed after crossing at irregular border points, still living in hotels and shelters?
So let's put this into context. That's an increase of 8,000 people, 8,000 spaces over a period of 3 years. So that's very gradual. It's a responsible increase. In terms of the asylum seekers, this is an issue that is very separate from our resettled refugees. It is a challenge that we have been dealing with in terms of our outreach program, but also increasing resources for the Immigration Refugee Board and CBSA and others who deal with irregular border crossings. Not each and every asylum seeker who seeks asylum in Canada will be found to be a genuine refugee. Those who are found not to be genuine refugees will be asked to leave Canada, and a substantial number of them actually do remove themselves. So we have to put these things into perspective.
Of 15,000 have arrived so far, how many remove themselves?
Well, those folks are going through the process, so it's early to talk about those folks, but generally speaking, for folks who arrive in Canada who are found not to be deemed eligible to stay in Canada, about 30% of them remove themselves voluntarily. The others are removed eventually once they exhaust their appeal mechanisms.
Sorry, I just want to be clear really quickly, though, because just in case we have been talking about deportations in the context of asylum seekers for a long time. My understanding was that less than 1% had actually physically been deported of those who were deemed to be ineligible or to have their claims rejected. Are you saying that 30% have left?
No, I'm saying to you that, first of all, for the latest updated numbers, you would have to speak to my colleague, Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, as well as the Minister of Border Security. What I can tell you is, generally speaking, historically, 30% of folks who are not eligible to stay in Canada usually leave voluntarily. The remaining number are usually removed by our border officials once they've exhausted their appeal mechanisms. But in terms of the updated numbers for the recent asylum seekers who have arrived in our country irregularly, you would have to get those numbers from my colleague, Minister of Public Safety. And
I understand you're saying that they're two separate things, but at the end of the day, the systems, for example, or the services that are accessed that's one stream.
No, it's not. Absolutely not.
Well, people
asylum seekers do not have access to settlement services that are given to resettled refugees, for example, or family reunification folks who are sponsored by Canadians or permanent residents. The plan that we have today is on permanent immigration. The lion's share of our plan is on economic immigration. Folks who are coming here to fill unfilled jobs and are coming here to lend us their skills and talents. And those folks are creating jobs for Canadians. I've seen that myself. I've seen companies that have moved to Canada through our economic immigration system that have created good, well-paying, full-time, middle-class jobs. So we are answering the call. The choice we have to make is, do we answer the call of employers and communities who want more workers to fill unfilled jobs so that they can grow their businesses and grow their economy and prosper? Or do we shut our doors and actually undercut our own economic interests and the prosperity of Canadians?
And I understand that you're talking about economic immigration there, but on the issue of refugees, we have Lisa MacLeod saying that 40% of Toronto shelter occupants are refugees. They're saying there's a crisis there. We have numbers that show in 2017, 25% of those occupants were refugees. In 2016, it was just 11%.
Lisa MacLeod is engaged in fear-mongering and using this issue to demonize people. The fact of the matter is the Toronto...
What evidence do you have for that?
Well, I'll tell you. The Toronto the Toronto shelter system does not ask questions on the status of those who are seeking shelter in their system.
So her department is lying when they say that there are 46%.
So how would Lisa MacLeod know who's accessing the system if the temporary housing shelter system in Toronto does not collect stats based on status? Number one.
Wasn't John Tory also saying that, though, as well? Is he lying, too?
No, I'm saying that the figures that are being thrown around are not based on facts. They're based on speculation. There are not the status of people seeking the access to the shelter system in Toronto is unknown. Therefore, to put a number on that is simply not factual.
So you're saying her department is not factual when they say that 46% of those occupants...
I'm saying that it doesn't withstand scrutiny. And the record of Lisa MacLeod speaks for itself. She has not engaged in our plan to engage with the City of Toronto to triage asylum seekers away from Toronto by regionalizing the issue so that we can have other cities step in to work together.
Explain what you mean by that.
What I mean by that is this issue, all Canadians expect all orders of government to work together when we have challenges. On the issue of asylum seekers, the federal government has stepped up. We've provided not only funding through the Canada Social Transfer, we've provided additional funding of $50 million, $11 million of which will go to Toronto and Ontario to deal with this issue. Now, we had a plan in place to work through Ontario and Toronto to conduct a triage system that will relieve pressure from the City of Toronto. The province of Ontario chose to walk away from that system. We're still at the table. We're working with the City of Toronto to triage people away. And we have successfully done that to the city of Chatham, Ontario, and others to relieve pressure from Toronto. So we're there. We're providing not only funding, but we're actually bringing solutions to the table. The government of Ontario is not doing that. They're not engaged. Instead, they've unfortunately decided to engage in fear-mongering and demonizing of asylum seekers, which is not what Canada is all about.
Do you feel that John Tory also demonized asylum seekers? Because he raised the exact same concerns, to be fair.
No, I engaged Mayor Tory on that, and I told him that we will always be there for the City of Toronto. The difference between John Tory and Lisa MacLeod is that Minister MacLeod has called asylum seekers names.
What has she called them?
She has called them, she has labeled all of them as economic immigrants. And she said that none of them are genuine refugees, which is something that we trust our Immigration Refugee Board to do. And so we have to respect the system that we have. We have mechanisms in place.
You're saying that Lisa MacLeod said not a single asylum seeker is a genuine refugee? When did she say that?
No, she said on her Twitter that these are economic migrants, that they're not genuine refugees. So this is factual, it's on the record. But the fact of the matter is the IRB is in charge of determining who is a genuine refugee and who is not, and we have to respect the independence of the Immigration Refugee Board. Those who are determined to be refugees will stay in Canada. Those who are not will be asked to leave our country, and that is part of our law.
Do you understand, though, the concern, and I understand it's a political issue between you and your government and the government in Ontario, but the idea that is being expressed that there is sort of there are services available, in Toronto specifically, the shelter system, that they're saying, critics are saying that your government's plan is not adequately working, that this is not a sustainable way to manage this issue.
First of all, I would point those folks. It's fair to have concerns about asylum seekers, but the fact of the matter is the numbers have gone down 75%. So if our plan was not working, why are the numbers
actually,
down
the numbers
75%?
are up this time. There are.
I'm talking about the numbers compared to last year.
Well, you're talking month to month. If you're talking year over year, there's actually more asylum seekers that have crossed into Canada this time this year compared to this time last year. Overall.
What Canadians expect us to do is to work with all orders of government to make sure that when challenges present themselves, that we come up with solutions that each level of government is able to implement. The federal government is there. We've worked very closely with the City of Toronto. We were willing to engage the province of Ontario. They decided not to be part of the solution. We haven't left the City of Toronto on its own. We've provided not only money, but a triage system to triage people away from the City of Toronto while they wait for their hearings. We have to let the system take its course. We've signed international agreements that are part of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms to allow asylum seekers at least to get a fair hearing, so that those who are deemed to be genuine refugees can be determined to be so, and those who are not can be determined by the same independent system. That is the system that we have, and that is the system that we remain committed to.
Okay, Minister, I'm out of time, but thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.